From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
They survived one of the worst childhood traumas, sexual abuse. Now they say the state owes them more time to heal before getting justice. Plus, how much difference would it make for the state to raise the minimum wage in Kansas? Differing opinions, as the governor says she wants to raise it for some, but not others. But first, the fight over a flat tax plan, or is it a dual tax rate, heads to the governor's office. But can it survive her red pen? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. The big story out of the State House this week, the Kansas House and Senate passing a tax relief bill and sending it to the governor for her signature. Republicans say it is a bipartisan plan, but opponents call it a flat tax plan and expect Governor Laura Kelly to veto it. Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau shows us what the debates looked like.
Well, that tax package is now heading here to the House, but even if it passes, the governor is promising to veto the bill. So the question is, will Republicans have enough votes needed to override that veto when it comes down? A GOP tax bill is moving through the State House, sparking backlash from Democrats.
It just seems that this is being rushed.
There are a lot of components here that I really like, but I will say the flat tax is a non-starter.
Its biggest flaw for the governor, a single rate income tax of 5.25%.
There's no way the flat tax does not work in the state of Kansas.
She's vowing to veto the plan, even with the other add-ons that mirror her own tax proposal. That includes speeding up, eliminating the food tax, and getting rid of the state tax on Social Security.
Hopefully my veto will be sustained, and then we can move forward on a tax bill that works for Kansans.
It is past time. With $3 to $4 billion in the coffers, it's time to give the money back to Kansans.
Both Republican and Democratic leaders are holding out for their own plans to pass, arguing that theirs provides the most relief. The governor even siphoning some key votes in the Senate to sign on to her plan.
We have got to come up with the ways that help the people, and not just those at the top bracket.
Republicans failed to override the governor's veto last year, just one vote shy of the 27 votes needed for the bill to pass. Senator Dennis Pyle, a former Republican turned independent, voted to sustain that veto.
When we go back, you don't have the votes. Some point in this session, you're going to come to the realization that we're going to have to, if we want tax relief for the people of Kansas, you're going to have to come and look at what the governor is proposing.
Now, the vote in the Senate was 25 to 11. Again, keep in mind, 27 votes are needed to override the governor's expected veto. As for the House, they'll need 84 votes, and they're expected to vote on this week. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And the House did not get that 84 votes, so when they passed it, however, in both the House and the Senate, there were some folks who were absent at the point of voting. Fresh from these State House debates, we have joining us this week Republican State Representative Clark Sanders from Salina and political scientist Dr. Russell Arbin Fox from Friends University. Thank you both so much for being here. We did have a Democrat, but things didn't work out the way we expected, so we're moving ahead.
Oh, that never happens.
Oh, no, never, ever. We're moving ahead with the guests we have here today, and the debates, really, from everything I've read, I was there for the Senate debate. I kind of caught a little bit of the House debate. It sounded like it was pretty much along the same lines on both sides.
Yeah, well, of course, it went to a conference committee, and it came out of the conference committee, and so when you're voting on a conference committee report, you don't have the opportunity to amend it. You either take it or leave it. And the Republicans were very united, well, in the House especially, to take it. Now, I want to say a little bit right off. Well, I want to say a couple of things right off the top. The fact that we took up something this big, this early in the session, is something very unusual. Normally, these types of discussions wait till the end. But everybody recognizes, Republicans and Democrats and the governor, we have got to get something done about taxes this session. So we took it up early on. If the governor does veto it, which I suspect she will, and if we're unable to override it as Republicans, then we've got a chance to take another bite at the apple. So it was very unusual to take up something early on, but it speaks to the importance of this particular topic. Now, relative to chances of an override, in the House we need 84. We got 81. However, there were 4 Republican members absent. We're pretty sure they're all yes votes. If the veto comes, that we can override in the House. I'd say 97% sure of that. Because with the 4 absent, and if we get everybody there, that when we vote to override, that would put us at 85 Republicans, not to mention the 1 Democrat who voted with us. And so that would put us at 86, more than enough. The Senate is a lot tougher situation. There was 1 senator who was absent that we suspect would vote yes. So that would put us at 26. Where would that 27th vote come from in the Senate? And we're not sure we're going to get there. It would be an interesting thing. It would be, if you're a betting person, it would be an interesting bet. It would be a fair bet, because it really could go either way.
Yeah, it is very interesting because of the 3 Republicans that would be left in the Senate to vote for an override, 2 were the ones who led the charge against the bill during the debate. The 3rd one was not there, John Dahl, for the vote, but he was there when the governor last week had introduced her ideas in support of her tax plan. So probably expected to also be a no there.
Yeah, I mean, you say that it would be, an interesting wager to make. I'm pretty certain the governor, just like the leadership in the House and the Senate, they've already ran these wagers many times in their heads, and they already know the very likely outcomes, despite it being really close, which actually just goes to your point about the importance that they bring it up early. They knew, or at least they were fairly confident that they knew, both on the legislative and the executive side, how these things were going to play out. So let's play it out early in the session so that people can put down their markers, so that we can be clear about what different representatives and what different senators' personal priorities are in terms of their constituents. And then let's start taking a look at what kind of compromises or what kind of alternative bills can be made. I think it is entirely reasonable and wise that they did the important work of pushing this thing through early, probably exactly because they knew that they weren't going to be able to override the veto. And so they said, let's get this out here so that we can see where individual votes are, and we can then start taking it apart and trying to put it back together again.
So the governor keeps harping on about the flat tax aspect of this, or single rate tax, or dual rate tax, if you want to count 0 as a rate. But this is a comprehensive plan. I mean, this not only addresses income tax, it also addresses sales tax, and it addresses property tax. And I think of the 3, property tax is the most disliked tax. At least that's what I hear, is people really, really don't like the property tax.
Oh yeah.
So this plan would, instead of exempting 40 or 43,000 from property, it would exempt up to 100,000. So that's going to be a huge tax break for a whole lot of Kansans. So that's a huge part of this. Another thing is it's going to be indexed to the rate of inflation. Mm-hmm. Normally, what's been done in the past is you have a standard rate and an exemption, whatever it is, and that's that. Well, this way, if inflation goes up, which it most certainly will, the exemption will go up with it. So there's that aspect of it. From the sales tax side, the governor harped all last session about we need to get the food sales tax to 0. Well, this takes the food sale, and it's going to go to 0, regardless of what happens with this. It's going to go to 0 January 1, but this would move it up to April 1.
Yeah, this would expedite it.
So there's that whole aspect of it, and then there's the income tax aspect of it. And if this plan passes, there'll be over 300,000 Kansas that won't be paying any income tax at all. It'll eliminate income tax on Social Security, which will be a really nice break for a lot of Kansans. And it's it's not just the wealthy, it's everybody.
It is absolutely filled with a lot of things that both Republicans and Democrats have recognized are important to a lot of Kansans and something that a lot of Kansans are looking for. Obviously, your argument is that since this is a comprehensive plan, we shouldn't allow this particular dispute over income tax to sink it. It seems to me just as easy that people on the Democratic side could flip it around and say, since there's already obviously so much agreement amongst both the Republican leadership and the Democratic governor to do something about property tax and so forth, why are we holding it hostage to something that the governor has said up front she's going to veto, and that, you know, as you admitted, it's really kind of a close thing to see if you can override that veto in the Senate?
Well, we'll see. The governor, of course, has 10 days now. We passed it out Thursday, and so the governor has 10 days to either sign it, veto it, or let it become law without her signature. I fully suspect she's going to veto it. And then, assuming that happens, we have 30 days in order to override
30 days from the time of the veto?
From the time
or 30 days from the 10?
No, from the time she makes the veto.
Thank you.
right.
I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah.
While we're waiting to find out what the governor does, let's move on to one of the other things. From taxes to paychecks, Governor Laura Kelly wants a $15 an hour minimum wage for state workers, but the higher minimum wage proposal stops there. The Wichita Eagle reports the Democratic governor's new budget proposal includes funds to bring 969 employees in the executive branch up to the $15 minimum wage mark and give all state workers a 5% raise. Her budget director cited the need to recruit and retain talent in the midst of rising inflation. But the proposal won't apply to those who work for state government contractors, and the state's overall minimum wage would remain $7.25 an hour. Economist and business researcher Dr. Jeremy Hill at Wichita State University says that's been bad news for Kansas, not just individual Kansans. He told the Eagle, quote, "We don't have a labor problem. We have a wage problem. We have a lot more demand for labor than is available. Firms are saying, I don't understand. They're all really low quality. They're sitting at home. No, we've already tapped out that labor market, and the price signal should be the wage." Opponents of raising the state's minimum wage say the market should dictate how much businesses pay, and most already exceed the $15 minimum. I know there have been many efforts. I mean, Jim Ward, when he was in the House, would introduce it every session to raise the minimum wage in Kansas. Really never got any play. Do you see any set of circumstances that could get Republican support for a minimum wage increase across the state?
I can only speak for myself, but frankly, I doubt it. I'm not a big minimum wage guy, and here's the thing. I would take exception to what the professor was saying there. Hardly anybody in the private sector, at least, is paying minimum wage anymore. You've got fast food places all over advertising $12, $14, $15 an hour, and yet there's still a labor shortage. Labor shortage is one of the big problems in the state, and there's lots of other jobs that pay way over minimum wage that we can't find people to work in. We learned an interesting thing during the pandemic. If you'll pay people to stay home and not come to work, they'll stay home and not come to work. So I'm not sure. I frankly don't think that raising the minimum wage would solve the labor shortage.
Well, to expand on Dr. Hill's argument there, just because I have interviewed him a number of times and I know what he says, is that the problem is that Kansas is surrounded by states with higher minimum wages and overall higher pay. Not just the minimum wage, but all other wages are generally higher for equivalent jobs within Kansas. And what Kansas is doing is it's losing the fight for that labor with those states. Folks are leaving Kansas.
Well, I think that that's really the key thing. You've got to take a look overall at how different wages play out in different states for similar jobs. I mean, there's a purpose to talking about raising the minimum wage, but what you really need to confront when you're dealing with labor shortages is, okay, so what is the particular sector that you're looking at? You're looking at government contractors, you're looking at police officers, you're looking at firefighters, you're looking at ETS people. You got to take a look at what those wages are relevant to the surrounding communities. And that is a reality that plays out across Kansas. It plays out on a Kansas level. It plays out on a municipal level. I mean, here in Sedgwick County, we just recently saw the county government authorizing a pay increase for their sheriffs because they were aware that the pay increase for city police officers was going to create a drain. So people react to the wages that are around them. I don't know what the specifics are for the government workers that Governor Kelly is talking about insofar as Missouri or Oklahoma or Colorado is concerned, but simply talking about it in terms of, we need to raise the minimum wage. I mean, there's separate arguments for that, but the real argument is taking place elsewhere.
All right. Well, child sex abuse survivors are back at the State House this last week, lobbying lawmakers to give them more time to come forward and sue their abusers. Last year, lawmakers removed the statute of limitations for criminal reports of child sexual abuse, but they only extended the maximum age to file a civil lawsuit from 21 years to 31 years of age.
My name is Kim Bergman.
My name is Lisa Patterson-Kinsey.
My name is Tess Ramirez. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse.
They've told their stories of abuse before and got lawmakers' attention doing it.
And he would start touching me between my legs and my breast. And I didn't like it. I thought it was confusing. It was scary. But he said it was his duty as my father to teach me to be a woman.
Now,
we're back.
Because they say when lawmakers ended the statute of limitations for criminal reports of child sexual abuse, they didn't go far enough. They need to do the same thing for civil lawsuits.
I just turned 30, and I am terrified by the idea of facing my abuser again. I'm not ready.
Tess Ramirez is the only one of the publicly outspoken survivors behind this bill who's still young enough to file a civil lawsuit under last year's law that sets the limit at 31. She plans to do so, but says most survivors can't even bring themselves to tell one person until the average age of 52. A lawsuit requires them to tell attorneys, a judge, jury, and their abuser.
And I'm talking about it publicly. If I can do that and I still can't face him, I know there are a multitude out there that wouldn't be ready either. So here we are, back again, begging the legislature to give them that time. I wouldn't do it if I wouldn't have these people behind me supporting me, but because I'm so scared.
The main objection to that last year, they say, was a fear of a bunch of false reports in an effort to cash in on the new law. But so far, no one's filed a civil lawsuit under the extended statute of limitations.
In actuality, false reports only happen in about 2 to 5% of cases, and usually those cases have something else going on in them.
Something else like an ongoing divorce, etc. Now, keep in mind, Tess Ramirez, who is a woman speaking and giving those statistics, she is an attorney herself at this point, so she's speaking from personal experience. One thing I noticed, I was in that news conference, and one thing I noticed was the difference from the year before, the number of lawmakers standing up behind those women who have already thrown their support behind this addition kind of lends credence to the idea that it might make it through this year.
Oh, I mean, I think it's very possible it could. Not just because, you have this additional support, but because I really feel as though we are seeing a slow but very, very strong change in the way so many of us, on whatever side of the political divide we find ourselves on, think about these sorts of issues. I think, I'm 55 years old. When I was growing up, when I learned about the reality of sexual abuse, child abuse, and so forth, I imagined it within a particular kind of box. And I imagined a particular set of responses that you would see from people that were victimized by it. And that was the way in which I understood people needed to act if they were going to be taken seriously in asking for compensation or seeking justice. I think in the wake of the Me Too movement, in the wake of so many other things associated with social media, a lot of them bad as well as good, we are understanding a little bit more about how deeply this kind of trauma can go, and also how different individuals process that trauma and how much time they need to do it. I'm not an expert in this. I don't know what the appropriate age should be, but it doesn't surprise me that you see more people standing up in support of at least the general cause, because I think a lot of us, again, Republicans and Democrats alike, are recognizing, okay, maybe this is a lot more complicated than the thing that we saw in the box early on. Maybe we need to understand that there's other things going on here that we need to give time to play out with.
Well, you mentioned you're in your 50s, and they said the average age at which somebody who's suffered child sexual abuse first tells anybody at all is 52.
And I'd never heard that before.
Yeah,
I'd be
I hadn't
interested to
either.
learn more about that data.
Mm-hmm.
That's very well said. And obviously, everybody, Republican, Democrat, Independent, we're all for helping sexual abuse victims in any way we can. The alleged perpetrators, of course, also have rights. But I mean, if there's somebody who's been convicted and they've gone through a, the criminal law, 31, 41, 51, I mean, I see a lot of support for this.
No. Well, the original removing the statute of limitations on the criminal, that went through both the House and the Senate unanimously. And how often can we say that?
Did it go through last year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's what I say. There's a big appetite for making this change as well. I see this happening.
Okay.
All right. Well, finally today, how should Kansas pick the people to temporarily fill vacancies in seats like the U.S. Senate? One state senator wants to take the decision out of the hands of the governor and give it to political parties. But the Attorney General's office says that's most likely unconstitutional. The Kansas Reflector reports Senate Bill 254 would transfer to political parties the ability currently held by the state's governor to appoint temporary replacements when vacancies occur in the U.S. Senate. State Senator Karen Tyson said the bill is intended to start a conversation about changing the method relied upon by Kansas to fill vacancies in the U.S. Senate and in some statewide posts. She recommends the Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee examine the approach in Oregon, which fills vacancies exclusively through special elections. She said Kansas political parties could be responsible for nominating candidates to enter those special campaigns. Quote, "These positions are so critical and so important to our state and obviously to the nation," Tyson said. "I just think we are founded on a government of elected representatives, and so, therefore, we should improve this process to have those election cycles and allow the people to be the voice." A representative of the Attorney General's office said, as written, the idea would likely run afoul of the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Matt Bingasser, administrative counsel in the Attorney General's office, told lawmakers political parties are private organizations. "We are concerned that Senate Bill 254 delegates the appointment power outside the state's executive, which contradicts the 17th Amendment's language." Of 46 states that allow temporary executive appointments of U.S. senators, Bingasser said none would limit the governor's discretion as severely as envisioned in Tyson's bill. Bingasser said the bill, as introduced, would be a significant risk of bringing lawsuits against the state. And of course, this also comes after we had a huge dust-up a few years ago when the governor replaced a statewide position when LaTurner left the Treasury with her lieutenant governor, a Democrat, as the state treasurer. A lot of folks upset about that, and a lot of folks saying that perhaps is why we're seeing this bill this time around.
So I understand what Attorney General Kobach is saying. And for that reason, this may not end up going anywhere. However, I want to take you back to the Sebelius administration. There was a point in time in the Sebelius administration where there was a state secretary of state, a state treasurer, a state attorney general, a lieutenant governor, who were all Democrats, and not a one of them had been elected. Not one. And that's a problem. But because Kathleen Sebelius was able to appoint. Phil Klein ended up resigning. And then so she had an appointment there. There was a vacancy in the treasurer's office, I think, because Lynn Jenkins, ran for Congress. I don't know how it all came about, but out of the 6 positions, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, commissioner of insurance, and treasurer, the only elected person serving in their roles were the governor and the commissioner of insurance. And all the others were appointed. That isn't right. That isn't right. And interestingly, or not so interestingly enough, after the next elections, all the Democrats were gone. They were all gone.
No.
So I understand the sentiment of this. I just don't know if it would hold constitutional muster.
No. One thing I found interesting, sorry, I know you have a comment there, but I found it interesting that it really concentrated a lot of the discussion on the U.S. Senate seat. It sounds like there's perhaps discussion that if Donald Trump wins election in November, he might pull Roger Marshall into his administration.
I haven't heard anything about that, but obviously, if that was actually on the table, I mean, it could really upset things in terms of, as people jockey for position of importance and influence within the Kansas Republican Party. It'd be interesting to see. The only thing that I would want to say about this really quickly is, pursuant to your example of what was under the Sebelius administration, it is absolutely relevant to look at the governor's appointment power in the same way that we take a look at a president's appointment power. And within state constitutions, there can be a lot of debate about what sort of offices can be appointed, under what time frame, and so forth. But when you start talking about U.S. congressional representatives, when you start talking about U.S. senators, your ability as a state government is going to be very, very limited by the U.S. Constitution. There are some clear boundaries there in terms of what you can play with. Oregon has shown that you can fiddle with things maybe a little bit, but you're probably not going to be able to do the sorts of things that are being talked about in this bill.
All right. We'll have to watch and see what happens with that. Thank you both so much. We are out of time. I appreciate the conversation that we have had. I hope you have enjoyed it as well. We'd also like to thank our news partners, KSN News, the Wichita Eagle, and Cake News, for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the conversation with you on social media. Just look for @Pilar Pedraza or @PBS Kansas on most platforms. For now, stay safe and have a great week.